My career hasn't been linear. I've sort of started out in research, and then the questions that I was motivated by, I was drawn into some practical work, and I enjoyed understanding what the issues were that the practice world was struggling with, and just tried to align my research work with that really since. So, and it was some, big issues of social change. In my case, it was being exposed to these massive changes going on in the Soviet Union at that time. I was a Russian speaker. I trained in Russian, and I'd visited Moscow and some of the other outlying republics during that time of just incredible change happening. And of course, you want to understand what's happening and how the outside world can make a contribution. So I think that's what really pulled me more and more into this domain. It all circulates around the issue of how can international aid and the international community writ large make a positive contribution in countries undergoing internal conflict and tensions, and how to stop violence, how to build peace, essentially. But especially for me, the focus being on what constructive role can outsiders play, because there are actually lots of other roles that outsiders end up playing with good intentions that don't actually help. So it's really focused on honing in on what is that relationship between international agencies and well-meaning outsiders and local activists and people living in societies affected by conflict that are trying to emerge as peaceful societies. So my doctoral work, one of the cases I looked at was the experience of international peace-building initiatives in Kosovo over a very long time span. I've also done focused work on civil-military peace operations and the bigger multinational UN-led peace-building missions or peace missions in Afghanistan and Liberia and also in Kosovo. My career has sort of been more in accompanying qualitative research, working in participatory ways alongside those engaged in this work from conflict-affected societies and from, the international side of the equation. So I've seen more about, good processes that have really made a difference on whatever the questions are that people are struggling with, and ways of engaging around a question and capturing the knowledge that the people working on these issues have, but they don't have the ability to sort of maybe refine and share, and there's a lot of reasons why that's the case. But I was involved in a very pivotal kind of global participatory research effort a long time ago now, but 25 years ago now, but it still has had enormous impact in the field. And it was called the Reflecting on Peace Practice Project, and it was kind of a global ingathering of peace-building practice, both international and locally based, nationally based initiatives and activists. And a lot came out of that in terms of how, sort of common understandings of what the work can be doing, common ways of helping people struggling with particular questions in whether it's, Georgia or Kenya or Papua New Guinea, the particulars of conflict dynamics are very different everywhere you go. There are some common lessons, but there's a lot that needs to be teased out at this very specific level. And so I think what I've seen can be the most helpful is frameworks and more generic skills and tools for helping people do that in their own contexts or in specific contexts. You're sort of accompanying an effort, you're bringing critical skills and techniques and approaches to try to get at some good answers, and you're contributing those in a friendly way, in a way that wants to support what's happening. Right now, we're in a world where there's a resurgence of a focus on the use of force and very little need to sort of justify solutions to conflicts in terms of larger values or principles that we've been fighting for, at the level of the international community for a very long time. So that's a really kind of a crisis situation we're in right now. And how to address that, I think we have to look very critically at what, some in the world or some countries or some societies might have thought was a nice seamless process of building the liberal international order, where clearly there are groups that have been not part of that project and not on board with that project. And yes, some of that we think of as attributed to malign actors, and there's sort of a new lines of division which have emerged very strongly. But some of it, I think, is some of the internal dysfunction of the world we created that has created big open spaces for people to really doubt the utility of some of the international regimes and norms we've created, certainly the neutral application of them is very much in doubt, and there's a lot of doubt as to the relevance of these, if they're just going to be applied by the powerful for the powerful and ignored or dismissed in many other cases. And I think we have to take that seriously as an international community and figure out how to address those discontents. And so the challenge in that work is really helping bring in what outside actors and resources can bring in, getting that balance right of internationals not dictating top-down models of how one should build peace or what are the priorities. We're seeing a big backlash against civil society in many parts of the world, in this notion that externally funded civil society or foreign agents, that delegitimization of local civic actors is a very big challenge for our field, because we've sort of been part of dynamics which have maybe allowed that to happen. And I think the question we need to ask ourselves is why local populations don't want to defend these structures as much as we think they might. And it's very important to hone your skills, hone your understanding of what's been done so far, and come into the field armed with good critical questions and with a sense of where the need for new learning is. But then I would really strongly encourage young people to also just engage in the practice first, and whether that's interning with an NGO for a while, or maybe postponing that PhD and go and work with organizations and actors who are trying to move societies towards peace in the whole myriad of ways which that is going on. There's not just one way. And then perhaps figure out what you need to learn more about. But I think there's a way in which peacebuilding has become a little bit of a rarefied social science sort of discipline, rather than really about rolling up your sleeves and figuring out where the problems lie. Find a place that you are interested in, in terms of intercultural competence. Learn the skills, learn the languages, try to understand society from within, and then see if you can make a contribution there. I think that's much more valuable than thinking that there are some generic recipes out there for peace building, and if only one learns them enough in a more scholarly way, then somehow you can make a difference. I think it's kind of the other way around. It's bottom up.